Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to medieval England, for we often imagine the Middle Ages as a world of knights and kings, of men-at-arms and men-at-labour, and we forget the women who stood at the very heart of it all, who worked and endured and managed and mastered their hard world with a strength and a resilience that would, quite frankly, astonish us today. The women of the medieval world were tough, capable, hard-working, and formidable in ways that our own soft and comfortable age can scarcely imagine, and if you were somehow set down among them, expected to keep up with their labour and their endurance and their sheer competence, you would, I suspect, struggle a very great deal indeed. That is the gentle and admiring truth behind our title tonight, and it is the world we are going to wander through together, slowly, in the quiet of the dark. So, before you get comfortable, tell me in the comments where you're watching from in the world and what time it is. It's always 2 a.m. somewhere, and I find it comforting to imagine all of us lying awake in the dark together and drifting back through the centuries to worlds long vanished. Also, if this channel helps you drift off to sleep, tap the like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure at all. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for some sweet background hum, and get comfortable, because we have a long and gentle journey ahead of us tonight, back through the centuries to the medieval world and its remarkable women. Have you ever wondered what it was really like to be a woman in the medieval world, to live and work and endure in that distant and difficult age? Have you ever wondered how hard they worked, how much they managed, how much they endured, these women we so often overlook? Have you ever wondered at the sheer toughness and capability of the ordinary women of the past, at the strength that carried them through a world so much harder than our own? These are the things we are going to drift through tonight, slowly and gently, in the dark. The remarkable and admirable and surprisingly formidable world of medieval women. So settle back, let your eyes grow heavy, and let us travel together, softly, across the centuries, to meet the women of the medieval world. The first thing to understand about the women of the medieval world, and the thing that lies at the very heart of our journey tonight, is that we tend badly to underestimate them, to picture them as passive and powerless figures in the background of a world run entirely by men, when the truth was very much richer and more remarkable than that. This misunderstanding is worth clearing away at the outset. For once we set it aside, the real women of the medieval world can step forward in all their toughness and capability. The popular image of the medieval woman is a limited and often unfair one, a picture of a passive and downtrodden figure, confined and powerless, a mere background presence in a world of men. We imagine them perhaps as delicate damsels in towers, or as silent drudges in the shadows, figures without agency or strength, defined entirely by their subordination to the men around them. This image is not entirely without foundation, for the medieval world did indeed place real and heavy constraints upon women, as we shall explore gently and honestly in due course. But it is a partial and misleading picture, one that misses the extraordinary reality of what medieval women actually did and endured and achieved, and that reduces a rich and varied reality to a thin and unfair caricature. For the reality was that medieval women were, in fact, workers of extraordinary toughness and capability, bearing an enormous share of the labour of their world, managing households and businesses and estates, and displaying a competence and a resilience that the passive image entirely fails to capture. Far from being idle or powerless background figures, medieval women laboured tremendously hard, mastered a vast range of skills and tasks, and bore responsibilities that would test any of us today. They were not delicate ornaments but hardened workers, not passive victims but capable managers, not silent shadows but active and essential participants in the life and economy of their world. The real medieval woman was a figure of remarkable strength and competence, and it is this real woman we shall come to know tonight. This is not to deny the genuine hardships and constraints that medieval women faced. for those were real and severe, and we shall not pretend otherwise. Medieval women lived under real legal and social disadvantages, faced real dangers and hardships, and were denied many of the freedoms and opportunities that we now consider basic. All of this is true, and we shall explore it honestly and gently. But the point is that within these constraints, and often despite them, medieval women displayed a toughness and a capability and a resilience that command our real admiration, living lives of hard work and heavy responsibility that our own comfortable age can scarcely imagine. Their strength existed alongside their constraints, and it is that strength we wish above all to honor tonight. And that is the real meaning of our title, Gently Understood. It is not that medieval women were fearsome or unpleasant, but that they were so tough, so capable, so hardened by their difficult world, so competent across such a vast range of demanding tasks, that we of the soft and comfortable modern age would genuinely struggle to keep up with them, to match their labor and their endurance and their sheer competence. If you were set down in their world and expected to live as they lived, to work as they worked, to endure what they endured, you would, I suspect, find it very hard indeed. That is the admiring truth we shall explore tonight, the remarkable toughness and capability of the women of the medieval world. Let that gentle correction settle in the dark. We turn now to the sheer scale of the labor that filled their days. To understand the toughness of medieval women, we must begin with the sheer scale of the labor that filled their days. For the ordinary woman of the medieval world labored from dawn to dusk at an endless round of demanding tasks, a workload that would exhaust any of us today, and that formed the fundamental reality of her life. Let us wander gently through this world of labor and marvel at the strength it required. The life of the ordinary medieval woman was a life of ceaseless labor, of hard physical work that began before dawn and continued until after dark, an endless round of tasks that filled every hour of every day. There was no rest, no leisure, no long hours of idleness, but a constant round of demanding physical work, task following task, from the first light of morning to the last light of evening. The medieval woman rose early and worked late, laboring without pause at the countless tasks that her world required. And this ceaseless labor was simply the fundamental condition of her life, the reality against which everything else was set. To be a woman in the medieval world was, above all, to work, and to work extraordinarily hard. The range of this labor was vast, for the medieval woman was expected to master and perform an enormous variety of tasks, from the preparation of food to the making of cloth, from the care of animals to the tending of children, from the brewing of ale to the management of the household. She was not a specialist in a single task, but a mistress of many, competent across a huge range of demanding skills, each of which required real knowledge and effort and time. The sheer breadth of what the medieval woman was expected to know and do is genuinely astonishing, a mastery of countless skills that together made up the vast work of sustaining a household and a family in a hard world. She was cook and brewer, weaver and seamstress, gardener and dairymaid, nurse and manager, all at once, and competent in all. Much of this labor was physically demanding, in a way that our own work rarely is, requiring real strength and endurance, the hard physical effort of a world without machines to ease the burden. The medieval woman hauled water and carried loads, worked the heavy tasks of the dairy and the brewhouse, labored in the fields at harvest time, and performed countless other tasks that demanded real physical strength and stamina. This was not light or gentle work, but hard physical labor, performed by hand, requiring a toughness and an endurance that our own machine-assisted age has largely forgotten. The physical demands of the medieval woman's work were real and constant, and the strength they required was considerable. And all of this labor was performed alongside the bearing and raising of children, the management of the household, and the countless other responsibilities that fell upon the medieval woman, so that her working day was not merely long, but impossibly full. She labored at her endless tasks while also carrying and bearing and nursing and raising her children, while also managing the affairs of her household, while also meeting the countless demands that fell upon her, all at once and without pause. The medieval woman's day was a marvel of endurance and capability, an impossible seeming round of labour and care and management that she somehow accomplished day after day, year after year, throughout her hard life. When we consider the sheer scale of what she did, we can only marvel at her strength and doubt very much whether we ourselves could match it. Let that picture of endless labour settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the particular world of the peasant woman and the shape of her demanding day. Let us follow, gently, the shape of an ordinary peasant woman's day, for in tracing the round of her labour from dawn to dusk, we come to understand the true nature of her toughness, the sheer relentless demand of a life given over to work. Her day was a marvel of labour and endurance, and it is worth wandering through, that we might marvel at the strength it required. The peasant woman rose before dawn, in the cold and dark of the early morning, to begin the long day's work, for there was much to be done, and no time to waste in a life so full of labour. She would rise while the household still slept, kindle the fire, and begin the first tasks of the day, the preparation of the morning meal, the tending of the fire, the countless small chores that began the working day. There was no gentle waking, no slow start to the morning, but an immediate plunge into the labour of the day, rising in the dark to begin at once the endless round of tasks. The peasant woman's day began early and hard, and it would not ease until the day was done. Through the morning she laboured at the tasks of the household and the farm, preparing food, tending animals, working in the garden, hauling water, and performing the countless chores that filled the working day. She milked the cows and fed the animals, worked in the vegetable garden that provided much of the family's food, hauled water from the well or stream, prepared and cooked the meals, and turned her hand to the endless tasks that the household required. Each of these tasks demanded time and effort and skill, and together they filled the morning with ceaseless labour, the peasant woman moving from one task to the next without pause. The morning was a round of hard and various work, performed with the competence born of long practice. The work continued through the day, for there was always more to be done, the tasks of the household and the farm following one another in an endless succession that filled every hour. There was cloth to be made, and the constant spinning that occupied every spare moment. There was the dairy work of making butter and cheese. There was the brewing of ale. There was the care of the children, woven through all the other tasks. There was the preparation of the evening meal. The afternoon brought its own round of labour, as demanding as the morning. The peasant woman working steadily through the day at the countless tasks that sustained her household. There was no long rest in the middle of the day, no leisure, only the continuous labour that her life required. And in the seasons of greatest demand, particularly at harvest time, the peasant woman laboured in the fields as well, adding the heavy work of the harvest to her already impossible round of tasks. At harvest, when every hand was needed to bring in the crops, the women worked in the fields alongside the men, reaping and gathering and binding, performing hard agricultural labour in addition to all their other work. This seasonal field work added yet more to the peasant woman's burden. The heavy labour of the harvest piled atop the endless round of household tasks. The demands upon her were, at such times, almost beyond belief, and yet she met them, labouring in the fields and the household both, with a strength and an endurance that command our admiration. When the day at last ended, and the peasant woman finally rested, she had accomplished a round of labour that few of us today could match. And we should pause to notice what this day truly demanded, for it was not merely long but astonishingly various, calling for a breadth of skill that few of us could equal. In the course of a single day, the peasant woman might be a cook and a baker, a dairymaid and a brewer, a gardener and a keeper of animals, a spinner and a seamstress, a nurse and a healer, a mother and a manager, moving between a dozen different kinds of skilled work as the hours required. Each of these was a genuine skill, learned and practiced and mastered, and the peasant woman held them all at once, turning her hand from one to another through the long day without pause. To manage such a range of work, to hold so many skills and to deploy them all in the endless labor of the day, required a competence and a versatility that we, in our age of narrow specialization, can only marvel at. The peasant woman was, in truth, a mistress of a dozen trades, and she practiced them all every single day. Let that picture of her demanding day settle gently in the dark. We turn now to one of the great skilled trades that medieval women dominated, the brewing of ale. Among the many skills that medieval women mastered, one deserves particular attention, for it was a genuine and important trade that women dominated almost entirely, a skilled craft that was, for much of the medieval period, essentially women's work, the brewing of ale. The story of the alewife is a fascinating one, and it reveals medieval women as skilled and enterprising workers in a way that the passive image entirely misses. Ale was the everyday drink of the medieval world, consumed by all in great quantities, for the water was often unsafe, and ale was a staple of the diet as well as a pleasure. This meant that the brewing of ale was a constant and essential activity, for ale did not keep long and had to be brewed frequently, a regular and important part of the domestic economy. And this brewing was, for much of the medieval period, overwhelmingly the work of women, so much so that brewing was regarded as essentially a female occupation, and the woman who brewed ale, the alewife, was a familiar and important figure in every community. The brewing of the community's ale rested largely in the hands of its women, who supplied this essential drink through their skilled labor. Brewing was a genuine skill, requiring real knowledge and judgment, for the making of good ale was not a simple matter, but a craft that had to be learned and mastered. The brewer had to know how to malt the grain, how to manage the fermentation, how to judge the process at each stage, how to produce a good and drinkable ale rather than a spoiled or unpleasant one. This required real skill and experience, a mastery of the brewing craft that the alewife possessed and that marked her as a skilled worker. The making of ale was a genuine trade, demanding knowledge and judgment, and the women who practiced it were skilled craftswomen, mistresses of an important and difficult art. Many women brewed not only for their own households but for sale, selling their surplus ale to their neighbours, and so earning a real income through their brewing. The alewife who brewed well might sell her ale to the community, marking her house with a sign to show that fresh ale was ready, and so turning her skill into a source of income and a small business of her own. This made brewing not merely a domestic task, but a genuine commercial activity, a means by which women could earn money and exercise real economic agency through their skilled labor. The alewife was thus not only a skilled craftswoman, but often a businesswoman, selling her ale and earning her income through her trade. Many women across the medieval world engaged in this commerce, brewing and selling ale as a real economic enterprise. The prominence of women in brewing reveals a side of medieval women that the passive image entirely misses, showing them as skilled workers and enterprising traders, mistresses of an important craft, and participants in the commercial life of their world. The alewife was a figure of real skill and real economic significance, a woman who mastered a difficult trade and often turned it to profit, an active and capable participant in the economy of her community. Her prominence reminds us that medieval women were not idle or powerless, but skilled and enterprising, capable of mastering demanding trades and exercising real economic agency. The alewife stands as a fine example of the toughness and capability of medieval women, a skilled craftswoman and businesswoman in a world we too often imagine as closed to them. Let that picture of the alewife settle gently in the dark. We turn now to another great sphere of women's skilled labor, the making of cloth. If there was one form of labor more associated with medieval women than any other, one skill that occupied their hands through virtually every spare moment of their lives, it was the making of cloth, the endless work of spinning and weaving that was so central to women's labor that it became almost a symbol of womanhood itself. Let us wander gently through this world of thread and cloth and appreciate the skill and the ceaseless labor it required. The making of cloth was an enormous and essential labor in the medieval world, for all cloth was made by hand through a long and laborious process that began with raw wool or flax and ended with finished fabric. And this whole vast labor rested largely in the hands of women. Before cloth could be woven, the fiber had to be spun into thread, and this spinning was a constant, endless task performed by women in every spare moment, so central to women's work that the unmarried woman came to be called the spinster, after the spinning that filled her days. The spinning of thread was ceaseless, a task that occupied women's hands whenever they were not engaged in some other labor, for an enormous quantity of thread was needed, and it could be produced only slowly, by hand, through patient and constant work. Spinning was a skill that required real practice and dexterity, the drawing out and twisting of the fiber into an even, strong thread, a task that looked simple but demanded genuine competence. The spinner had to draw the fiber and twist it evenly, producing a consistent thread of the right thickness and strength, a task that required practice, skill, and constant attention. This was not mindless drudgery, but a genuine craft, mastered through long practice, and the skilled spinner produced good thread through her competence and care. The constant spinning that filled women's days was thus skilled labor, requiring real dexterity and judgment, performed with a competence born of lifelong practice. The weaving of the thread into cloth was a further skilled labor, the working of the loom to produce the finished fabric, a craft that required real knowledge and skill. Once enough thread had been spun, it could be woven into cloth upon the loom, a skilled task of setting up the threads and working them into fabric, producing the cloth that would be made into clothing and other goods. Weaving required real skill and knowledge, the mastery of the loom and the techniques of producing good cloth, and it was another of the skilled crafts that women practiced. Together, the spinning and the weaving made up an enormous labor of skilled work, the whole vast process of turning raw fiber into finished cloth, resting largely in the capable hands of women. The making of cloth was not only labor for the household's own use, but also, for many women, a source of income, for cloth and thread could be sold, and many women earned money through their textile work. The spinning and weaving that women performed produced not only cloth for their own families, but also goods that could be sold, and many women earned real income through their textile labor, contributing to the household economy through their skilled work. In some places, the making of cloth became a genuine industry, and women's textile labor was an important part of the medieval economy. The making of cloth thus reveals medieval women once again as skilled and productive workers, mistresses of an essential craft, and contributors to the economy of their world, their capable hands producing the cloth on which their whole society depended. Let that picture of spinning and weaving settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the woman as the manager of the whole household. Beyond the countless individual tasks she performed, the medieval woman held a role of real authority and responsibility, for she was the manager of the household, the mistress of a complex domestic economy that she ran with genuine skill and competence. This managerial role is one that the passive image entirely misses, and it reveals the medieval woman as a capable administrator of real responsibility. The medieval household was not merely a place to live, but a complex economic unit, a center of production and management that had to be run with real skill, and it was the woman who ran it. The household produced much of its own food and goods, managed its resources and its stores, coordinated the labor of its members, and functioned as a small economy in its own right, and the management of all this fell largely to the woman. She was the mistress of the household economy, responsible for its provisioning and its management, for the coordination of its many activities and the stewardship of its resources. This was a role of real responsibility and skill, the management of a complex domestic economy, and the medieval woman performed it with genuine competence. The managing of the household required a vast range of knowledge and skill, from the provisioning and preservation of food to the management of stores, from the coordination of labor to the keeping of the household's resources. The mistress of the household had to know how to provision the household for the year, how to preserve and store food against the seasons of scarcity, how to manage the household's stores so that they lasted, how to coordinate the many tasks and workers of the domestic economy. This required real administrative skill, a capacity for planning and management and stewardship that the medieval woman possessed and exercised. The running of the household was a genuine managerial task, demanding knowledge and judgment and skill, and the woman who performed it was a capable administrator. In larger and wealthier households, this managerial role expanded considerably, for the mistress of a great household might manage a large staff, oversee substantial resources, and administer a complex domestic enterprise of real scale. The lady of a manor or a wealthy household managed a large establishment, directing the work of many servants, overseeing the provisioning and management of a substantial household, administering resources and affairs of real complexity. This was management on a considerable scale, the administration of a large and complex enterprise, and it required real executive skill. The mistress of a great household was, in effect, the manager of a substantial operation, exercising real authority and administrative competence in the running of her domestic realm. When the men of the household were absent, moreover, the woman's managerial role expanded still further, for she might take on the management of the entire estate or enterprise, running affairs that extended far beyond the domestic sphere. When a husband was away, at war or on business or otherwise absent, his wife might take charge of the whole of his affairs, managing the estate, overseeing the business, making decisions and exercising authority in his absence. Medieval women frequently ran substantial enterprises and estates in this way, demonstrating a managerial competence that extended far beyond the household into the wider world of business and administration. This capacity to take charge, to manage complex affairs, to exercise real authority and competence, reveals the medieval woman as a capable administrator of real ability, a manager whose skills the passive image entirely fails to capture. Let that picture of the household manager settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the women who worked in the trades and businesses of the town. While much of our picture of medieval women centers on the countryside and the household, the towns of the medieval world were home to a great many working women, craftswomen and tradeswomen and businesswomen who participated actively in the commercial life of their communities. These working women of the town are a fascinating part of our story, and they reveal medieval women as active and capable participants in the economy in ways that may surprise us. The towns of the medieval world were centers of trade and craft, and women were active participants in this commercial world, working in a wide range of trades and businesses, both alongside their husbands and, often, in their own right. Women worked in many of the crafts and trades of the town, sometimes assisting their husbands in the family business, sometimes carrying on trades of their own, participating actively in the commercial life of their communities. The image of the town as an exclusively male commercial world is a false one, for women were present and active in a wide range of trades and businesses, contributing their labor and their skill to the economy of the town. Working women were a familiar and important part of the medieval urban world. Many women worked in trades related to food and drink, as we have seen with brewing, but also as bakers and cooks and sellers of food, supplying the essential provisions of the town. Women were prominent in the food trades, brewing ale, baking bread, preparing and selling food, supplying the daily necessities of the urban population. These food trades were an important part of the urban economy, and women's prominence in them made them essential participants in the commercial life of the town. The woman who baked bread for sale, or sold food in the market, or brewed ale for her neighbours, was a working member of the urban economy, contributing her labour and earning her income through her trade. Women also worked in the textile trades, in which their spinning and weaving skills found commercial application, and in a range of other crafts and trades besides. The textile industry, so central to the medieval economy, employed many women whose spinning and weaving and other textile skills were essential to the production of cloth. Women worked too in various other trades, as we find them in the records engaged in a surprising range of occupations, participating in the crafts and commerce of the town in many capacities. The range of women's work in the medieval town was considerable, extending across many trades and crafts, and revealing women as active and versatile participants in the urban economy. Some women achieved real success and independence through their trades, becoming established businesswomen who ran their own enterprises and enjoyed real economic standing. A woman might build up a successful business of her own, whether in brewing or baking or textiles or some other trade, becoming an established and respected member of the commercial community, enjoying real economic independence and success. Widows in particular often carried on the businesses of their late husbands, becoming established businesswomen in their own right. These successful tradeswomen and businesswomen demonstrate that medieval women could achieve real economic success and independence, participating fully in the commercial life of their world and prospering through their skill and enterprise. They stand as fine examples of the capability and enterprise of medieval women, active and successful participants in the economy of their age. Let that picture of the working women of the town settle gently in the dark. We turn now, gently and with respect, to one of the greatest tests of medieval women's strength, the bearing of children. We come now, gently and with the greatest respect, to one of the profoundest tests of medieval women's strength and courage, an ordeal that they faced with a bravery that commands our deepest admiration, the bearing of children in a world without modern medicine. We shall treat this with care and sensitivity, without dwelling on anything distressing, for our purpose is to honour the courage it required, not to trouble you with its difficulties. The bearing of children was, in the medieval world, a genuinely dangerous undertaking, for childbirth without modern medicine carried real risks, and every medieval woman who bore a child faced these dangers with a courage that we can scarcely imagine. In an age before modern medical knowledge, before the understanding of infection and the techniques of modern obstetrics, childbirth was a perilous passage, and the women who undertook it faced real danger. That medieval women bore this danger, not once but often many times through their lives, and did so as a normal and expected part of their existence, speaks of a courage and a resilience that command our deepest respect. The bearing of children was an act of real bravery in the medieval world, faced by women with a matter-of-fact courage that is genuinely humbling. Medieval women faced this ordeal supported by other women, for childbirth was a female sphere, attended by midwives and female relatives and neighbours who brought their knowledge and their support to the labouring woman. The birthing chamber was a world of women, from which men were generally excluded, where the labouring woman was attended by the midwife, a skilled woman who brought real knowledge and experience to the birth, and supported by her female relatives and neighbours. This community of women, gathering to support one of their number through the ordeal of childbirth, is a moving aspect of medieval women's lives, a network of female solidarity and support that surrounded the labouring woman with care and knowledge. The midwife in particular was a figure of real skill and importance, whose expertise guided the birth and supported the mother. We shall not dwell on the dangers and difficulties of medieval childbirth, for there is no need, and it would trouble the calm of our night. It is enough to acknowledge, with respect and admiration, that medieval women faced this ordeal with courage, that they endured its dangers and its pains as a normal part of their lives, and that in doing so, they displayed a strength and a resilience that we can only admire. The courage required to face childbirth in the medieval world, again and again through a woman's life, was immense, and it was borne by ordinary women as a matter of course, with a bravery that they themselves would scarcely have thought remarkable. This quiet, matter-of-fact courage in the face of real danger is among the most admirable of the qualities of medieval women. That medieval women faced this danger repeatedly, bearing many children through the course of their lives, makes their courage all the more remarkable, for they faced the perils of childbirth not once but again and again. The medieval woman might bear many children through her life, facing the dangers of childbirth each time, undertaking the perilous passage repeatedly with the same matter-of-fact courage. This repeated facing of real danger, this bearing of the ordeal again and again through the years, speaks of a resilience and a bravery that are genuinely humbling. When we consider the courage that medieval women brought to the bearing of children, the danger they faced and endured as a normal part of their lives, we can only admire their strength and reflect with gratitude on how much safer this passage has since become. Let that respectful reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the raising of the children they bore. Having borne their children through the dangers of childbirth, medieval women faced the further great labor of raising them, of nurturing and caring for their children in a hard and dangerous world, a task that demanded not only endless work, but real emotional strength. The motherhood of medieval women is a moving and admirable aspect of their lives, and we shall wander through it gently. The raising of children was a great and constant labor, woven through all the other work of the medieval woman's day, for the care of children was ceaseless and demanding, added to the endless round of her other tasks. The medieval mother nursed and fed her children, watched over them, taught them, and cared for them, all while performing the countless other labors of her life. The care of children was not a separate task, but a constant thread woven through everything else, the mother tending her children while she worked, watching over them amid all her other labors. This added yet another layer of demand to the already impossible round of the medieval woman's day, the constant care of children piled atop all her other work. The medieval mother often had many children to care for families were frequently large, and the demands of caring for several children of different ages, all at once, were considerable. The medieval woman might have many children born over the years of her life, and at any given time she might be caring for several of them, from infants to older children, each with their own needs and demands. The management of a large family, the care of many children of different ages, added greatly to the medieval mother's burden, requiring her to meet the varied needs of several children while also performing all her other work. This was a considerable task, the raising of a large family in a hard world, and it demanded real capability and endurance. The raising of children in the medieval world also required real emotional strength, for it was a world in which many children did not survive, and the medieval mother often faced the loss of children she had borne and raised. We shall touch upon this gently, for it is a sorrowful aspect of medieval life. But it is important to acknowledge the emotional strength that medieval motherhood required. In a world of high child mortality, the medieval mother often knew the grief of losing a child, and had to find the strength to endure this sorrow and to carry on, caring for her surviving children amid her grief. This emotional resilience, this capacity to endure loss and to carry on, was another of the strengths that medieval motherhood demanded, and it commands our deepest respect and sympathy. And yet medieval motherhood was also, of course, a source of real joy and love, for medieval mothers loved their children as mothers always have, and found in them real joy amid the labor and the hardship. We should not imagine medieval motherhood as merely a burden, for it was also a source of deep love and real joy, the medieval mother cherishing her children and delighting in them as mothers always have. The bond between medieval mothers and their children was as real and as deep as any, and the love and joy of motherhood brightened the hard lives of medieval women, even amid their labour and their sorrows. The motherhood of medieval women was thus a thing of both great demand and great love, requiring endless labour and real emotional strength, but also bringing the deep joys of maternal love. It is among the most admirable and moving aspects of their lives. Let that reflection on motherhood settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the women who held the healing knowledge of their communities. Among the many roles that medieval women filled, one of the most important and fascinating was that of the healer. For much of the medical knowledge of the medieval community rested in the hands of its women, the wise women and healers who tended the sick with their knowledge of herbs and remedies. This healing role is a significant part of our story, and it reveals medieval women as keepers of important knowledge and skill. Much of the everyday medical care of the medieval world was provided by women, for the services of trained physicians were beyond the reach of most people, and it was to the women of the community, with their knowledge of traditional remedies, that people turned when they fell ill. The ordinary sick of the medieval world were tended largely by women, by the wise women and healers who possessed the traditional knowledge of herbs and remedies, and by the women of the household who cared for their own sick. This meant that a great deal of medical care rested in women's hands, the women of the community serving as its everyday healers, tending the sick with their knowledge and their care. The medieval woman was, in a real sense, the doctor of her community, providing the medical care that most people could obtain in no other way. The knowledge that these healing women possessed was considerable, a body of traditional medical law built up over generations, encompassing the properties of herbs, the preparation of remedies, and the treatment of a wide range of ailments. The wise woman knew the healing properties of many plants, how to prepare them into remedies, how to treat the various ills and injuries that afflicted her community. This was real knowledge, a genuine body of medical law passed down and accumulated over generations, and the women who possessed it were the keepers of important healing knowledge. The wise woman was not a mere superstitious figure, but a genuine healer, possessed of real knowledge and skill, providing real medical care to her community. The healing women also played a central role in childbirth, as we have seen, for the midwife was a skilled woman whose knowledge and experience guided the births of the community. The midwife was a particular kind of healing woman, specialized in the care of childbirth, and her skill and knowledge were essential to the community. Together, the wise women, the healers, and the midwives made up a whole world of female medical care, the women who tended the sick and the laboring and the injured, keeping and applying the healing knowledge of their communities. This female sphere of healing was a vital part of medieval life, and the women who maintained it were figures of real importance and skill. The healing role of medieval women reveals them once again as keepers of important knowledge and providers of essential service, capable and knowledgeable figures whose skills were vital to their communities. The wise woman and the healer were not passive or powerless figures, but respected keepers of valuable knowledge, providing care that their communities depended upon, exercising real skill and commanding real respect. Their healing role reminds us that medieval women were repositories of important knowledge and skill, essential providers of care in a world that depended upon them. The wise woman stands as another fine example of the capability and importance of medieval women, a keeper of healing knowledge and a provider of essential care. Let that picture of the healing women settle gently in the dark. We turn now, gently and honestly, to the real constraints that the medieval world placed upon women. Having celebrated the toughness and capability of medieval women, we must now turn, gently and honestly, to the real constraints that their world placed upon them, for it would be dishonest to pretend that medieval women were not subject to genuine disadvantages and limitations. We shall explore this soberly and without indignation, for it is an essential part of an honest picture, even as it deepens our admiration for what women achieved despite these constraints. The medieval world placed real legal disadvantages upon women, limiting their rights and their independence in ways that we would now consider deeply unjust, subordinating them in law to the authority of men. Women's legal rights were restricted in many ways, their independence limited, their status in law subordinate to that of men. A woman's legal position was often defined by her relationship to a man, to her father or her husband, and her rights to property and independent action were frequently curtailed. These legal disadvantages were real and significant, constraining women's freedom and independence, subordinating them within the legal order of their world. It is important to acknowledge these constraints honestly, for they were a genuine feature of medieval women's lives. The married woman in particular faced significant legal constraints, for upon marriage a woman's legal identity was in many respects absorbed into that of her husband, her property, and her independent legal standing much reduced. The medieval wife often found her property and her legal rights subordinated to her husband's authority, her independent legal identity diminished by her marriage. This subordination of the wife was a significant feature of medieval law, constraining the married woman's independence and subjecting her to her husband's authority in many matters. The legal position of the married woman was, by our standards, deeply unequal, and it represented a real constraint upon her freedom and independence. These legal constraints reflected the broader assumptions of the medieval world about the proper place and role of women, assumptions that held women to be subordinate to men and that shaped the whole structure of law and society. The medieval world assumed a natural hierarchy in which women were subordinate to men, and this assumption was reflected in the law, in the customs of society, in the whole structure of the medieval order. These assumptions were deeply held and rarely questioned, forming the background against which women's lives were lived, and shaping the constraints and disadvantages they faced. The legal disadvantages of women were thus not isolated features but expressions of a whole worldview that held women to be subordinate, a worldview woven deeply into the fabric of medieval society. And yet, even within these real constraints, medieval women found ways to exercise agency and to act with real effect, working within and sometimes around the limitations placed upon them. Despite the legal disadvantages they faced, medieval women were not simply passive victims of these constraints, but found ways to exercise real agency, to manage their affairs, to act with effect in the world. Widows in particular enjoyed greater legal freedom, as we shall see, and even married women often exercised real influence and authority within their sphere. The constraints were real, but so was the agency that women exercised within and around them, and this capacity to act with effect, despite the limitations of their world, is itself a testament to their strength and capability. It is a mark of their remarkable resilience that they achieved so much within a world that constrained them so severely. Let that honest reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the realities of marriage in the medieval world. Marriage was the central institution around which most medieval women's lives were organized, the state to which most aspired, and in which most lived. And understanding the realities of medieval marriage is essential to understanding the lives of medieval women. We shall wander through this gently, exploring both the constraints and the real partnership that marriage could involve. Marriage in the medieval world was, as we have touched upon, often a practical arrangement as much as a romantic union, shaped by considerations of property and family and economic partnership, particularly among the propertied classes. The medieval marriage served practical purposes, joining families and property, establishing economic partnerships, and providing the framework within which households were formed and children raised. Among the common people, There was often real freedom of choice in marriage, while among the propertied, marriages were more often arranged for family advantage. In either case, marriage was a practical institution as well as, or sometimes instead of, a romantic one, serving the economic and social purposes of the medieval world. Within marriage, the medieval wife was, in law, subordinate to her husband, subject to his authority in many matters, as we have seen. Yet the reality of medieval marriage was often more of a partnership than this legal subordination might suggest, for the household was a joint economic enterprise in which both husband and wife played essential roles. While the law subordinated the wife to her husband, the practical reality of the medieval household was often one of partnership, husband and wife working together in the joint enterprise of the household economy, each contributing essential labor and skill. The wife's role in this partnership was substantial, her labor and management essential to the household's functioning, and her practical influence often considerable, whatever the legal theory of her subordination. The medieval wife's contribution to the household was, indeed, so essential that the household could scarcely function without her, for her labor and her skills and her management were central to the whole domestic economy. The work of the wife, her labor and her management, and her many skills, was essential to the household, so that the household depended upon her as much as upon the husband. This essential contribution gave the wife real importance and real practical influence within the household, whatever her legal subordination, for her role was indispensable to the functioning of the domestic economy. The medieval wife was thus not merely a subordinate, but an essential partner, her contribution central to the household, her importance real and recognized. The partnership of medieval marriage could also involve real affection and companionship, for medieval husbands and wives often developed real bonds of love and mutual regard, whatever the practical origins of their unions. Though marriages were often practical arrangements, they could and often did grow into relationships of real affection and companionship, husband and wife developing genuine bonds of love and mutual regard over the years of their partnership. The medieval marriage was not necessarily cold or loveless, but could be a relationship of real warmth and companionship, a partnership of the heart as well as of the household. The medieval wife, then, was often not merely a subordinate or a mere economic partner, but a companion and a loved one, sharing a real bond with her husband. Medieval marriage, for all its constraints and practical purposes, could be a relationship of real partnership and affection, and the medieval wife an essential and cherished partner in the shared enterprise of life. Let that reflection on marriage settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a surprising source of freedom and power for medieval women, the state of widowhood. Among the most surprising aspects of medieval women's lives, and one that runs quite contrary to our usual assumptions, is the real freedom and power that widowhood could bring. For the widow often enjoyed a degree of independence and authority that the wife did not, becoming a figure of real standing and autonomy. This surprising freedom of the widow is a fascinating part of our story, and it reveals medieval women exercising real power and independence. The widow, freed from the legal subordination of marriage, often enjoyed a legal independence and autonomy that the married woman did not, able to hold property, conduct business, and manage her own affairs in her own right. Upon the death of her husband, a widow might come into control of property and resources and enjoy a legal standing and independence that she had not possessed as a wife. She could hold and manage property, enter into contracts, conduct business, and act in law in her own right, exercising an autonomy that the constraints of marriage had denied her. This legal independence made the widow a figure of real autonomy and standing, able to manage her own affairs and control her own resources in a way that few other medieval women could. Many widows used this independence to become substantial figures in their own right, managing property and businesses, exercising real economic and social power, and enjoying a standing and an autonomy remarkable for their time. The widow might take over and run her late husband's business, manage substantial property and resources, become an established and independent figure in her community, exercising real economic power and enjoying real autonomy. Widows were often prominent in trade and business, carrying on enterprises in their own right, and some became figures of considerable wealth and influence. The independence of widowhood thus allowed many medieval women to exercise real power and to achieve real standing, becoming substantial and autonomous figures in their communities. This freedom of the widow ran quite contrary to the general subordination of medieval women, offering a striking exception in which women could exercise real independence and power. In a world that generally subordinated women, the widow stood as a striking exception, a woman who could hold property and conduct business and manage her own affairs with real autonomy. This exception is a fascinating one, revealing that the medieval world could accommodate female independence and power under certain circumstances, and that medieval women could and did exercise real autonomy when their circumstances allowed. The widow's freedom is a reminder that the subordination of medieval women was not absolute, that there were spaces in which women could exercise real independence and power. The widow's power and independence also reveal the capability of medieval women. For the widows who successfully managed property and business and affairs demonstrated a competence and a capability that the passive image entirely misses. The widow who took over and ran a business, who managed substantial property, who conducted her affairs with skill and success, showed a competence and a capability that reveal medieval women as able managers and administrators. Her success in exercising her independence demonstrated the skills and the capability that medieval women possessed, and that could flourish when given the freedom to do so. The widow stands, then, as a powerful example of the capability and the potential of medieval women, a figure of real independence and power, who demonstrated what women could achieve when the constraints upon them were loosened. Let that surprising picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the powerful women of the noble world, the ladies of the manor. Among the women of the medieval world, the noble ladies, the mistresses of manors and great households, occupied a position of real power and responsibility, managing great estates and wielding real authority in a way that reveals the heights that medieval women's power could reach. The lady of the manor is a fascinating figure, and her world of power and responsibility is well worth our gentle exploration. The lady of a medieval manor was a figure of real authority and responsibility, the mistress of a great household, and often the manager of a substantial estate, wielding real power in the running of her domain. She presided over a large household, directed the work of many servants, managed the provisioning and affairs of a substantial establishment, and often took a real hand in the management of the estate itself. This was a position of real power and responsibility, the lady of the manor exercising genuine authority in the running of her household and estate, a figure of standing and command in her domain. The noble lady was no idle ornament but a manager and administrator of real responsibility, wielding genuine power in her sphere. When the lord was absent, as he often was, at war or at court or on business, the lady frequently took charge of the entire estate, managing its affairs, directing its labour, and even, on occasion, defending it. In her husband's absence, the lady of the manor might take full charge of the estate, managing its lands and its labour, overseeing its business, exercising the authority of its head. Medieval noble women frequently ran great estates in this way, managing complex affairs and wielding real power in the absence of their husbands. On occasion, the lady might even be called upon to defend her estate, taking charge of its defence in time of danger, a striking image of the power and responsibility that noble women could exercise. The lady of the manor, in her husband's absence, became the effective ruler of her domain, wielding real authority and demonstrating real capability. The management of a great estate required real skill and knowledge, for the lady had to oversee complex affairs, manage substantial resources, and direct the labor of many people, a demanding administrative task. The lady of the manor had to understand the management of the estate, the overseeing of its agriculture and its resources, the direction of its many workers, the conduct of its business and its affairs. This required real administrative skill and knowledge, a capacity for management and command that the noble lady possessed and exercised. The running of a great estate was a substantial managerial undertaking, and the lady who accomplished it demonstrated real executive capability, managing a complex enterprise with skill and authority. The power and capability of the noble lady reveal the heights that medieval women's authority could reach, showing women wielding real power and managing great affairs in a way that the passive image entirely fails to capture. The lady of the manor, managing her great estate and wielding her real authority, stands as a striking example of the power that medieval women could exercise, the heights of responsibility and command that they could reach. Her example reminds us that medieval women were capable of wielding real power and managing great affairs, that the capability of medieval women could extend to the command of substantial domains. The lady of the manor is a powerful testament to the authority and capability of medieval women, a figure of real power in a world we too often imagine as closed to female authority. Let that picture of the noble lady settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the women who rose to the very heights of power, the women who ruled. Among the most remarkable of all medieval women were those who rose to the very heights of power, the queens and great noblewomen who ruled kingdoms and wielded authority over the affairs of nations. For the medieval world, for all its subordination of women, produced women of extraordinary power who shaped the history of their age. These women who ruled are among the most striking refutations of the passive image, and their stories are well worth our gentle telling. The medieval world produced queens and noblewomen of extraordinary power, women who ruled kingdoms, led armies, shaped the politics of their age, and exercised authority over the greatest affairs of state. Some ruled as queens in their own right, some as regents for young sons or absent husbands, some through the sheer force of their character and ability, but all wielded real power at the very heights of their world. These were women of formidable capability, who governed and commanded and shaped events, exercising a power that the passive image of medieval women entirely fails to capture. The heights of power that some medieval women reached were remarkable indeed, and they reveal the real authority that women could wield. These powerful women governed and commanded, made war and peace, managed the great affairs of state, and shaped the politics and the history of their age. They ruled over kingdoms and territories, directed the business of government, engaged in the diplomacy and the warfare of their time, and left their mark on the history of their age. Some led armies into battle, some governed as able and effective rulers, some were formidable politicians who outmaneuvered their rivals and shaped the destiny of nations. These women exercised real power at the highest level, governing and commanding with skill and authority, and their achievements stand as a striking testament to the capability of medieval women. The power of these women was often won and held against great odds, for they exercised authority in a world that did not readily accept female rule, and their success required extraordinary skill and determination. To wield power as a woman in the medieval world was to face resistance and doubt, to govern in a world that questioned the very idea of female authority, and the women who succeeded did so through extraordinary ability and force of will. Their achievements were won against the grain of their world, through a skill and a determination that overcame the resistance to female rule. This makes their success all the more remarkable, a testament to the exceptional capability of the women who rose to power despite the obstacles their world placed in their way. These women who ruled stand as the ultimate refutation of the passive image of medieval women, demonstrating that women could reach the very heights of power and wield authority over the greatest affairs of their age. Their example reveals the real heights that medieval women's power could reach, the real authority that women could wield, the real capability that medieval women possessed. They governed kingdoms and shaped history, exercising a power that few could match, and their achievements stand as a powerful testament to what medieval women could accomplish. The women who ruled are a striking reminder that the medieval world, for all its subordination of women, could produce women of extraordinary power, and that the capability of medieval women could reach the very heights of authority. Let that powerful picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the women of the Church, the nuns and abbesses and holy women of the age. The Church offered medieval women one of the few paths to a life beyond marriage and motherhood, and within its institutions women found opportunities for learning, leadership, and spiritual authority that were largely denied them elsewhere, so that the nuns and abbesses and holy women of the age form an important part of our story. The women of the Church are a fascinating group, and their world of devotion and learning and authority is well worth our gentle exploration. The convent offered medieval women an alternative to marriage and motherhood, a life of religious devotion that also provided opportunities for learning, community, and leadership not readily available elsewhere. For women who did not marry, whether by choice or circumstance, the religious life offered a respected and meaningful path, a life of devotion within a community of women. The convent was a place where women could pursue a religious vocation, live in a community of their fellows, and find a purpose and a place beyond the roles of wife and mother. This alternative was an important one, offering medieval women a respected path that did not depend on marriage, a life of devotion and community and purpose. Within the convent, women could pursue learning and scholarship to a degree largely denied them in the outside world, and some of the most learned women of the medieval age were nuns, who devoted themselves to study and writing. The convent was a place of learning, where women could read and study and write, pursuing an intellectual life that was rare for women outside its walls. Some nuns became scholars of real accomplishment, writing works of theology and philosophy and literature, composing music, and pursuing learning to a high level. The convent thus offered medieval women a rare opportunity for intellectual development, a place where they could pursue learning and scholarship and achieve real intellectual accomplishment. Some of the most learned and accomplished women of the medieval world were nuns who found in the religious life the opportunity to develop their minds and their talents. The abbess who governed a convent wielded real authority and responsibility, managing a community and often substantial estates, exercising a leadership and a power that few medieval women could attain. The head of a religious house was a figure of real authority, governing her community, managing its affairs and often its substantial property and estates, exercising real leadership and power. The abbess of a great convent might govern a substantial community and manage extensive estates, wielding real authority and exercising real power in a way remarkable for a woman of her time. This was a position of genuine leadership and responsibility, the abbess exercising real authority over her community and its affairs, a striking example of the power that medieval women could attain within the church. The great abbesses were figures of real standing and authority, wielding a power that reveals the heights that women's leadership could reach. Some holy women achieved a spiritual authority and influence that extended far beyond the convent, becoming revered figures whose wisdom and holiness were sought by people of every station, including the powerful. Certain women achieved a reputation for holiness and wisdom that gave them real spiritual authority and influence, so that they were revered and consulted by people of every rank. Some became renowned for their piety and their spiritual insight, their counsel sought even by the powerful, their influence extending far beyond the walls of any convent. These holy women achieved a spiritual authority remarkable for their time, becoming revered and influential figures whose wisdom was sought and whose holiness was honored. Their example reveals another path by which medieval women could achieve real standing and influence through the spiritual authority that holiness and wisdom could confer. Let that picture of the women of the Church settle gently in the dark. We turn now, gently and with care, to one of the darker threads of our story, the shadow of witchcraft. We come now, gently and with care, to one of the darker threads of our story, the shadow of witchcraft that fell across the lives of some medieval women. For the fear of witchcraft could bring suspicion and danger upon women, particularly those who stood out or lived at the margins. We shall treat this soberly and without dwelling on anything distressing, for it is not our purpose to trouble you, but it belongs to an honest account of medieval women's lives. The fear of witchcraft was a real feature of the medieval world, a belief in the power of certain people to work harm through hidden and malign means, and this fear could fall with particular weight upon women. The belief in witchcraft, in the power of some to work evil through occult means, was widespread, and women were often the objects of such suspicion, regarded as particularly liable to the temptations that were thought to lead to witchcraft. This association of women with the fear of witchcraft could bring real danger upon them, the suspicion of witchcraft falling with particular weight upon women who, for one reason or another, attracted it. We shall not dwell on the particulars of what could follow from such suspicion, for it is among the darker aspects of the medieval world, but note simply that the shadow of witchcraft could fall upon medieval women and bring real danger. Those most vulnerable to the suspicion of witchcraft were often women who stood apart in some way. The old, the poor, the solitary, the sharp-tongued, those who lived at the margins of their communities, or who otherwise attracted notice and suspicion. The women most liable to accusation were often those who were in some way vulnerable or set apart. The widow living alone, the old woman dependent on charity, the woman known for a sharp tongue or a quarrelsome temper. Such women, standing apart from the ordinary run of their communities, could attract the suspicion that fell upon the supposed witch, their very vulnerability and difference making them targets. It was often, in this sad way, the most vulnerable women who were most at risk, those least able to defend themselves who were most liable to suspicion. It should be remembered, however, that the great witch persecutions belonged more to the period after the Middle Ages than to the medieval period itself, and that for much of the medieval age, the fear of witchcraft, though real, did not reach the terrible intensity it would later attain. The most terrible persecutions of those accused of witchcraft came largely after the medieval period, in the centuries that followed, and for much of the Middle Ages, the fear of witchcraft, though present, was less intense and less deadly than it would later become. We should not then project the horrors of the later persecutions back onto the medieval period, which, for all its fears, did not generally see the terrible witch hunts of the later age. This is an important qualification, and a somewhat comforting one, that the medieval period itself was, in this respect, less terrible than the age that followed. The shadow of witchcraft, then, was a real, if intermittent, danger in the lives of some medieval women, a threat that could fall particularly upon the vulnerable and the marginal, and it forms a sober thread in our story. Yet even here, we may find something to admire in the medieval women who lived under this shadow, in the resilience of those who endured suspicion and hardship, in the strength of the vulnerable women who bore the weight of their community's fears. The shadow of witchcraft reveals the dangers that could fall upon medieval women, but it also reveals, in the endurance of those who lived under it, something of the resilience and the strength that our story has celebrated throughout. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the double standard of reputation under which medieval women lived. Medieval women lived under a double standard of reputation and conduct, held to stricter standards than men and judged more harshly for their failings, and this double standard shaped their lives in ways that reveal both the constraints they faced and the strength with which they bore them. The double standard is an important part of our story, and understanding it deepens our appreciation of the medieval women who lived under its weight. Medieval women were held to a stricter standard of conduct than men, particularly in matters of reputation and virtue, their behavior more closely watched and more sharply judged, their reputations more fragile and more fiercely guarded. Where men enjoyed considerable latitude in their conduct, women were held to a much stricter standard, their reputation and their virtue closely watched and severely judged. A woman's reputation was a fragile and precious thing, easily damaged and fiercely guarded, and women were judged far more harshly than men for any failing or impropriety. This double standard placed a heavy burden upon women, requiring them to guard their reputations with constant care and judging them with a severity that men did not face. The unfairness of this double standard is plain, and it weighed heavily upon the lives of medieval women. The double standard reflected the whole set of assumptions that placed women in a subordinate position, holding them to standards that served the interests and the honor of men and families, and judging them by their conformity to these expectations. The stricter standard to which women were held reflected the assumptions of a world that valued women's virtue and reputation as matters of family honor and male interest, judging women by their conformity to the roles and expectations assigned to them. This double standard was bound up with the whole subordination of women, with the assumptions that made women's conduct a matter of family honor, and subjected them to a control and a judgment that men did not face. It was one of the many ways in which the medieval world constrained and judged its women, holding them to expectations that served interests other than their own. Yet medieval women navigated this double standard with skill and resilience, guarding their reputations, managing their conduct, and maintaining their standing in a world that judged them harshly. The women who lived under the double standard learned to navigate it, to guard their reputations and manage their conduct with the care that their world required, to maintain their standing and their honor despite the severity of the judgment they faced. This navigation required real skill and resilience, a constant vigilance and care, and the women who succeeded in maintaining their reputations and their standing demonstrated a competence and a strength that we should recognize and admire. To live successfully under the double standard was itself an achievement, a testament to the skill and resilience of the medieval women who managed it. The double standard, then, reveals both the constraints under which medieval women lived and the strength with which they bore them, both the unfairness of their world and the resilience with which they navigated it. In the double standard, we see the burden that medieval women carried, the unfair judgment to which they were subjected, but we also see the skill and resilience with which they bore this burden, the competence with which they navigated the constraints of their world. It is another instance of the theme that runs throughout our story, the strength and capability of medieval women revealed even in the constraints they faced, the resilience with which they bore the burdens their world placed upon them. Let that reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the extraordinary strength with which medieval women endured the hardships of their world. At the heart of our story lies the extraordinary strength with which medieval women endured the hardships of their world, the resilience and the fortitude with which they bore burdens that would break many a modern person. And it is this strength, above all, that the title of our tale invites us to consider. For the medieval woman endured hardships that we can scarcely imagine, and endured them with a strength that commands our deep admiration. The medieval woman endured a life of hardship that would test the strength of anyone, a life of relentless labor, frequent childbirth, constant danger, and endless care, born with a resilience that we can scarcely comprehend. She labored from dawn to dusk at the endless work of the household and often the fields, bore and raised children through the dangers of medieval childbirth and the high mortality of the age, faced the constant threats of disease and hardship and want, and carried the endless burden of care for her family and household. This was a life of relentless hardship, born without any of the comforts and protections we take for granted, and the medieval woman bore it with a strength and a resilience that command our admiration. The sheer endurance that her life required is difficult for us to imagine. Consider the hardships she faced, the endless physical labor, the dangers of repeated childbirth, the loss of children to the high mortality of the age, the constant threat of disease and want, the burden of caring for her family through every difficulty. The medieval woman labored harder than most of us can imagine, faced dangers we can scarcely conceive, endured losses that would break many a heart, and bore burdens that would test the strongest among us. She faced the loss of children with a frequency that we, in our safer world, are spared. She labored through hardships that we, in our comfort, can scarcely imagine. She endured a life whose difficulty is hard for us fully to grasp. And she bore all this with a strength and a resilience that reveal the extraordinary fortitude of medieval women. This endurance was not passive suffering but active strength. The resilience of women who met the hardships of their world with courage and competence, who kept their households and families going through every difficulty, who endured and persevered and prevailed. The strength of the medieval woman was not mere passive endurance but active resilience, the strength to keep going, to hold her household and family together, to meet the hardships of her world with courage and capability. She did not merely suffer her hardships, but met them with strength, keeping her family fed and her household running through every difficulty, enduring and persevering with a fortitude that reveals real strength of character. This active strength, this resilient competence in the face of hardship, is among the most admirable qualities of the medieval woman. It is this strength, above all, that the title of our tale invites us to consider, for the truth is that few of us, soft and comfortable in our modern world, could endure what the medieval woman endured as a matter of course. Could we labor as she labored, from dawn to dusk without rest or respite? Could we bear the dangers and losses that she bore with such resilience? Could we endure the hardships that were, for her, simply the ordinary conditions of life? The honest answer, for most of us, is that we could not, that we would struggle to bear what the medieval woman bore as a matter of course, that her strength and endurance far exceed what our comfortable lives have required of us. In this sense, truly, we could not handle what the medieval woman handled every day, and the recognition of this is a recognition of her extraordinary strength. Let that admiring reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the times of crisis and trouble, when the strength of medieval women was most sorely tested of all. If the ordinary life of the medieval woman required great strength, it was in the times of crisis and trouble, in war and plague and famine, that her strength was most sorely tested. And it is here, perhaps, that her extraordinary resilience shines most clearly. For the medieval woman met the greatest catastrophes of her world with a fortitude that held her family and community together through the worst that life could bring. And this fortitude is well worth our gentle admiration. In times of war, when the men were away or when danger threatened, the medieval woman often took upon herself the whole burden of holding the household and the family together, managing alone under the most difficult conditions. When war took the men away or brought its dangers near, women were left to manage the household and the family alone, to keep the work going and the children fed, and the home together under the hardest of conditions. They took on the tasks their absent men had performed, managed the affairs of the household in the face of danger and uncertainty, and held their families together through the disruptions and dangers of war. This capacity to carry on alone, to hold everything together through the crisis of war, reveals the strength and the resilience of the medieval woman, who met even the disruptions of war with a fortitude that kept her family and household going. In times of plague and pestilence, when disease swept through the medieval world and death came to so many, women bore the terrible burden of nursing the sick, caring for the dying, and carrying on through scenes of loss and grief that we can scarcely imagine. We shall not dwell on the horrors of the great pestilences, for they are among the darkest passages of the medieval world. But note simply that when disease came, it was often women who nursed the sick and cared for the dying, who bore the burden of loss and carried on through the grief and the danger. To care for the sick through such times, to endure such loss, and yet to carry on, keeping what remained of the family and household together, required a strength and a resilience that command our deepest admiration. The women who endured the great pestilences and carried on through their losses showed a fortitude that is difficult to comprehend. In times of famine and want, when the harvests failed and hunger stalked the land, women bore the burden of feeding their families on too little, stretching scarce resources, and finding ways to keep their children alive through the hard years. When famine came, as it periodically did, it was often the woman who bore the burden of feeding her family on far too little, of stretching meagre resources to keep her children fed, of finding some way to carry the household through the hard and hungry years. This management of scarcity, this feeding of a family through famine, required a resourcefulness and a strength that reveal the capability of the medieval woman, even in the direst circumstances. The woman who kept her family alive through famine showed a strength and a resourcefulness that command our admiration. In all these times of trouble, then, the medieval woman revealed a strength and a resilience that rose to meet even the greatest catastrophes of her world, holding her family and community together through war and plague and famine, with a fortitude that is truly remarkable. It is one thing to endure the ordinary hardships of daily life, and another to meet the great catastrophes of war and pestilence and famine, and the medieval woman met even these with a strength that kept her family and household going through the worst that her world could bring. This is perhaps the fullest measure of her strength, this capacity to endure and to carry on through the greatest of crises, and it stands as the ultimate testament to the extraordinary resilience of the medieval woman. Let that admiring reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the bonds of friendship and community among medieval women. Beyond the labour and the hardship, medieval women lived rich lives of friendship and community, bound together with other women in networks of mutual support and companionship that sustained them through the difficulties of their world. And these bonds form a warm and heartening part of our story. The friendships and communities of medieval women reveal another dimension of their lives, the companionship and solidarity that helped them endure and thrive. Medieval women were bound together in networks of friendship and mutual support, sharing the burdens of their lives, helping one another through difficulty, and finding in the company of other women a companionship and solidarity that sustained them. Women helped one another with their work, shared in the care of children, supported one another through childbirth and illness and hardship, and found in their friendships a source of strength and comfort. These bonds among women were a real and important feature of medieval life, a network of mutual support that helped women bear the burdens of their world. The companionship and solidarity of women sustained them through the difficulties of their lives, providing a source of strength and comfort that we should recognize and honor. The work of women often brought them together, for many of the tasks of the medieval woman were shared or communal, performed in the company of other women, so that labor itself was often an occasion for companionship. Women gathered to spin and to sew, met at the well and the market and the oven, worked together at the tasks of the household and the community, and in this shared labor found companionship and connection. The communal nature of much women's work meant that labor was often social, an occasion for the company and conversation of other women, and this made the burdens of work lighter and wove the bonds of community. The shared work of women was thus also a source of friendship and connection, the tasks of the household and community bringing women together in companionship. Women supported one another in particular through the great events and crises of life, through childbirth and illness and bereavement, gathering to help and comfort one another in times of need. In childbirth especially, women gathered to support and assist the mother, the community of women coming together to help through this dangerous and important event. In illness and bereavement too, women supported one another, offering help and comfort in times of difficulty and loss. This mutual support through the crises of life was among the most important functions of the bonds among women, the community of women coming together to help its members through the great and difficult events of life. The support that women gave one another in these times reveals the strength and the value of the bonds among them. These bonds of friendship and community reveal a warm and sustaining dimension of medieval women's lives, the companionship and solidarity that helped them endure the hardships of their world and find joy and comfort amid its difficulties. The friendships and communities of medieval women were a source of strength and comfort, a network of mutual support that sustained them through hardship and enriched their lives with companionship and connection. In these bonds we see another dimension of the medieval woman's world, the warmth and solidarity that helped her endure and thrive, the companionship that made the burdens of her life lighter and its joys greater. It is a heartening picture, this world of women's friendship and community, and it reveals the warmth and the mutual support that sustained medieval women through the difficulties of their age. Let that warm picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the everyday faith and devotion that filled the lives of medieval women. Faith was woven through every part of medieval life, and for medieval women in particular, religious devotion was a constant presence, a source of comfort and meaning and strength that sustained them through the hardships of their world. The everyday faith of medieval women is an important part of our story, revealing the spiritual dimension of their lives and the strength they drew from their devotion. Religion pervaded the life of the medieval woman, shaping the rhythm of her days and her years, filling her world with the rituals and the beliefs and the comforts of faith. The medieval woman lived in a world saturated with religion, her days marked by prayer, her years shaped by the festivals and observances of the church, her whole life woven through with the beliefs and rituals of her faith. This religious devotion was not a thing apart from ordinary life, but woven through it. The faith of the medieval woman present in her daily tasks and her great occasions, a constant presence that shaped her world. Religion was the very air the medieval woman breathed, present in every part of her life, from the smallest daily task to the greatest events of her existence. For the medieval woman, faith was a source of real comfort and strength, a solace in the hardships of her life, a meaning that gave sense to her suffering, a hope that sustained her through difficulty. In the face of the hardships and losses of her world, the medieval woman found in her faith a source of comfort and strength, a solace that helped her bear her burdens, a meaning that gave sense to her suffering. Her faith offered her hope in the face of hardship, comfort in the face of loss, meaning in the face of difficulty, a spiritual strength that sustained her through the trials of her life. This comfort and strength that faith provided was among its most important gifts to the medieval woman, a source of resilience that helped her endure the hardships of her world. Women expressed their devotion in many ways, through prayer and worship, through pilgrimage and charity, through the observance of the rituals and festivals of the church, weaving their faith through the fabric of their lives. The medieval woman practiced her faith through the round of prayer and worship, through acts of charity and devotion, through pilgrimage to holy places, through the observance of the many rituals and festivals of the religious year. These practices of devotion filled her life with the expressions of her faith, giving form to her belief and weaving her religion through the fabric of her days. The many ways in which women express their devotion reveal the depth and the importance of faith in their lives, the religious devotion that was so central a part of the medieval woman's world. Some women pursued their devotion to remarkable depths, becoming known for their piety and their spiritual insight, achieving a spiritual richness that reveals the heights that women's faith could reach. Beyond the ordinary devotion of everyday life, some women pursued their faith to remarkable depths, developing a rich spiritual life, achieving a piety and an insight that marked them as women of exceptional devotion. These women reveal the spiritual heights that medieval women could attain, the richness of the inner life that faith could nurture. Their example reminds us that the faith of medieval women was not merely a matter of outward observance, but could be a rich and profound inner life, a spiritual depth that reveals another dimension of the capability and the strength of medieval women. Let that reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the older women of the medieval world and the respect that age could bring. The older woman occupied a particular and often respected place in the medieval world, for age could bring to a woman a standing and an authority that her younger years had not afforded, and the older women of the age form an interesting part of our story. The place of the older woman reveals another dimension of medieval women's lives, the standing and the respect that age could bring. Age could bring to a woman a real standing and authority, for the older woman, experienced and knowledgeable, often commanded a respect and wielded an influence that her younger years had not allowed. The older woman had accumulated the experience and the knowledge of a lifetime, and this could bring her a standing and a respect within her family and community, an authority born of age and experience. The older woman was often a figure of real influence, her counsel sought, her knowledge valued, her authority respected, commanding a standing that age and experience had earned her. This respect for the older woman reveals that the medieval world could honor and value women, that age could bring to a woman a standing and an authority that reflected her experience and her wisdom. The older woman was often a repository of knowledge and skill, the keeper of the practical wisdom of her family and community, the one to whom others turned for the knowledge that experience had taught her. The older woman had accumulated a lifetime of practical knowledge, the skills and the wisdom of her work and her world, and she was often the one to whom others turned for this knowledge. She knew the ways of the household and the remedies for illness, the skills of her work and the wisdom of experience, and she passed this knowledge to the younger generation. The older woman was thus a keeper and transmitter of knowledge, a repository of the practical wisdom of her world, and this role gave her a real value and standing in her family and community. The older woman often took on important roles within her family and community, helping to raise grandchildren, advising and guiding the younger generation, and contributing her experience and wisdom to the life of her world. The older woman frequently played an important part in the life of her family, helping to care for and raise grandchildren, advising and guiding her children and their families, contributing her experience to the running of the household. In the wider community too, the older woman might play important roles, her experience and wisdom valued, her help and counsel sought. These roles gave the older woman a continued place and purpose, a valued part in the life of her family and community that reflected the respect that age could bring. The place of the older woman reveals that the medieval world could honor and value women, that age and experience could bring to a woman a standing and a respect that reflected her wisdom and her contribution. In the respected older woman, we see that the subordination of medieval women was not the whole story, that women could command respect and wield influence, that age could bring a standing and an authority that reflected a woman's experience and worth. The older woman, honored for her wisdom and valued for her knowledge, stands as another reminder of the respect and the standing that medieval women could attain, another dimension of the rich and various lives that our story has explored. Let that reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the matter of dress and beauty and appearance in the lives of medieval women. The medieval woman, like women of every age, cared about her appearance, and the dress and adornment of medieval women form a gentle and colourful part of our story, revealing the tastes and the concerns and the small pleasures of their lives. We shall wander through this lightly, for it is among the more cheering aspects of the medieval woman's world. Dress in the medieval world was a matter of real importance. marking a woman's station and status, expressing her identity, and offering, within the constraints of custom and law, a means of self-expression and pleasure. The clothing a woman wore reflected her station and her status, marking her place in the social order, and it was a matter of real significance in a world where dress carried much meaning. Within the bounds of what her station allowed, a woman's dress offered a means of expression, a way of presenting herself to the world, and a source of pleasure in its colours, and its fabrics, and its adornments. The dress of the medieval woman was thus both a marker of status and a means of expression, a matter of real importance in her life and her world. The medieval woman took pleasure in fine clothing and adornment as women have always done, delighting in colours and fabrics, in the small luxuries and pleasures that dress could offer, within the means and the customs of her station. The pleasure that women took in dress and adornment was real, a delight in fine fabrics and bright colours, in the ornaments and small luxuries that expressed taste and brought pleasure. This delight in dress was a small but real joy in the lives of medieval women, a source of pleasure and self-expression amid the labour and hardship of their world. The care that women took with their appearance, the pleasure they found in dress and adornment, reveals a cheering and human dimension of their lives, the small pleasures that brightened their world. Ideals of beauty in the medieval world differed in various ways from our own, and women pursued the beauty that their age admired through the fashions and practices of their time. The medieval world had its own ideals of beauty, its own notions of what was admired and desirable in a woman's appearance, and these differed in various ways from our own standards. Women pursued these ideals through the fashions and practices of their age, through their dress and grooming and adornment, seeking the beauty that their world admired. The particular ideals and fashions of the medieval world reflect the tastes of their age, and the pursuit of beauty by medieval women reveals the universal human concern with appearance expressed in the particular forms of their time. There were, it should be said, constraints upon the dress of medieval women, for custom, and sometimes law, regulated what women of different stations might wear, seeking to maintain the distinctions of the social order. The dress of medieval people was often regulated by custom and even by law, with rules that sought to maintain the distinctions of station by governing what people of different ranks might wear. These regulations applied to women as to men, constraining the dress of women within the bounds of their station, seeking to maintain the visible distinctions of the social order. Yet within these constraints, women found room for expression and pleasure, for the display of taste and the enjoyment of fine things, exercising what freedom their world allowed. The dress and appearance of medieval women thus reveal both the constraints of their world and the pleasures and self-expression they found within it, another dimension of their rich and various lives. Let that gentle picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the matter of love and the heart in the lives of medieval women. For all the practical considerations that governed medieval marriage, the women of the medieval world knew love as women have always known it, and the loves and affections of medieval women form a tender and universal part of our story. We shall wander through this gently, for it reveals the deep and universal humanity of the medieval woman's heart. The medieval woman knew love in all its forms, the love of husband and children, of family and friends, the deep affections that filled her heart and gave meaning to her life. However much practical considerations shaped medieval marriage, the medieval woman knew love, the love that grew between husband and wife, the fierce love of a mother for her children, the affection of family, and the warmth of friendship. These loves filled the heart of the medieval woman and gave meaning to her life, the deep affections that bound her to those she loved. The medieval woman's heart knew love as fully as any, and the loves that filled her life reveal the deep and universal humanity of her heart. The love between husband and wife, though marriage was often a practical arrangement, could grow into a deep and genuine affection, a real bond of love and companionship that developed over the years of a shared life. Though medieval marriage was often arranged for practical reasons, real love and affection could grow between husband and wife, a bond that developed through the shared life and the common labours and joys of marriage. Many medieval marriages became unions of real affection and companionship, the practical arrangement growing into a genuine bond of love over the years. This love that could grow within marriage reveals that the medieval woman's heart could find real affection even within the practical arrangements of her world, that love could flourish in the unions that practical considerations had made. The love of a mother for her children was among the deepest and most powerful of the medieval woman's affections, a fierce and tender love that we have already glimpsed and that filled the heart of the medieval mother. The love of the medieval mother for her children was a powerful and tender thing, a fierce devotion that we have already touched upon in speaking of motherhood. This maternal love was among the deepest of the medieval woman's affections, a love that endured through all the hardships and dangers of medieval childhood, a devotion that reveals the depth and the strength of the medieval woman's heart. The love of mother for child is among the most universal and powerful of human affections, and the medieval mother knew it as fully as any. Her heart filled with a fierce and tender love for the children she bore and raised. The loves and affections of the medieval woman reveal the deep and universal humanity of her heart, connecting her to women of every age through the shared experience of love. Whatever the differences of her world, the medieval woman loved as women have always loved, her heart filled with the affections that bind all people across the ages. In her loves, the medieval woman was our kin, sharing the universal human experience of love, her heart knowing the same affections that fill our own. The loves and affections of the medieval woman remind us of her deep and universal humanity, connecting her to us across the centuries through the shared experience of the loving heart. Let that tender reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to correct the great misunderstanding that has clung to medieval women. Having explored so much of the rich and various lives of medieval women, we may pause now to correct directly the great misunderstanding that has so often clung to them, the passive and diminished image that our story has challenged throughout. This correction is at the heart of our tale, and it deserves a direct and gentle statement. The common image of the medieval woman is a diminished and passive one, a figure of weakness and subordination, oppressed and silent and powerless, a mere victim of her world. We often imagine the medieval woman as a passive and powerless figure, oppressed and subordinated, silent and weak, a victim without agency or strength. This image, so common in our thinking, presents the medieval woman as a diminished figure, defined entirely by her subordination, lacking power or capability or agency. It is an image that has clung to medieval women, shaping our understanding and diminishing our sense of who they really were. And it is, as our story has shown, a profoundly misleading image, one that captures only a part of the truth and misses the greater reality of medieval women's lives. The truth, as our story has revealed, is far richer and more surprising, for the medieval woman was capable, hard-working, resilient and often powerful, a figure of real strength and capability, whose life was full of labour and skill and endurance. Far from the passive victim of the common image, the medieval woman emerges from our story as a figure of real capability and strength, a hard worker and skilled manager, a resilient endurer of hardship, and often a wielder of real power. She laboured and managed, endured and prevailed, and sometimes rose to real heights of power and influence. The reality of the medieval woman was one of capability and strength, of skill and resilience, a reality far richer and more admirable than the diminished image allows. This is the truth that our story has revealed, the real medieval woman behind the misleading image. The subordination of medieval women was real, and we have not denied it, but it was not the whole of their story, for within and around the constraints they faced, Medieval women exercised real agency, real capability, real strength. We have not pretended that medieval women were free or equal, for the constraints upon them were real and severe. But we have shown that these constraints were not the whole story, that within and around them, medieval women exercised real agency and capability, real strength and skill. The medieval woman was constrained but not powerless, subordinated but not passive, limited but not without capability and strength. The truth of her life lies in this fuller picture, in the recognition of both the constraints she faced and the strength and capability she exercised within and around them. And here, at last, we may return to the question with which we began, to the playful challenge in the title of our tale. For when we say that you could not handle the medieval woman, we do not mean it as any slight, nor in any romantic or fanciful sense, but in the plainest and most literal way. We mean that few of us, soft and comfortable in our modern world, could handle the life she handled as a matter of course. The labour from dawn to dusk at a dozen different skilled trades, the bearing and burying of children, the holding together of a household through war and plague and famine, the endless endurance of hardships we are largely spared. Could you rise before dawn and labour without rest until dark, day after day, year after year, at work that demanded the strength of your body and the skill of a dozen crafts? Could you face the dangers she faced, bear the losses she bore, and carry on regardless, keeping your family fed and your household whole? The honest answer, for most of us, is no. We could not handle what she handled, and so the title is no insult to her but the highest tribute, a recognition that the medieval woman possessed a strength and a capability that would put most of us, in all our modern comfort, quite to shame. To correct the passive image, then, is to see the medieval woman more truly, to recognize her real capability and strength, her real agency and resilience, the fullness of her life and character. When we set aside the diminished image and see the medieval woman as she really was, we find a figure of real strength and capability, a hard-working and resilient and often powerful woman, whose life was full of skill and endurance and achievement. This truer image does justice to the medieval woman, recognizing her real qualities and her real achievements, seeing her as the capable and resilient figure she really was. To see her thus is to correct a long injustice, to give the medieval woman the recognition she deserves, to appreciate the strength and capability that the passive image has so long obscured. Let that corrected picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to reflect on how far the world has come and the gratitude we may feel. Having explored the hard and constrained lives of medieval women, and having admired the strength with which they bore them, we may find ourselves reflecting on how far the world has come and feeling a quiet gratitude for the freedoms and opportunities that women have gained since. This is a comforting reflection and a fitting one to carry towards sleep. The lives of medieval women, for all the strength and capability they reveal, were also lives of real constraint and hardship, lived under limitations and subjected to a subordination that we would now find deeply unjust. The medieval woman, however capable and strong, lived a life bounded by constraints that we would find intolerable, subjected to a legal and social subordination that denied her much that we now regard as fundamental. She could not, in most circumstances, enjoy the freedoms and opportunities that women now possess, but lived within limitations that constrained her at every turn. This subordination was real and severe, and while medieval women exercised remarkable strength and capability within it, we would not wish to return to the constraints under which they lived. The world has come a very long way from the constraints of the medieval age, and women today enjoy freedoms and opportunities that the medieval woman could scarcely have imagined, a transformation in the condition of women that represents a real and profound progress. Women today may pursue education and careers, hold property and vote, participate in public life, and choose their own paths, enjoying freedoms and opportunities that were denied to the medieval woman. This transformation in the condition of women, this vast expansion of their freedoms and opportunities, represents a real and profound progress, a leaving behind of the constraints under which the medieval woman lived. The distance the world has travelled from the medieval age to our own, in the condition of women, is vast and heartening. This progress is worth remembering and appreciating, for it is easy to take for granted the freedoms that women now enjoy, forgetting how recently and how hard-won they are, how different the world was for women not so very long ago. The freedoms and opportunities that women now possess, so easily taken for granted, are in fact recent and hard-won achievements, the fruit of long struggle and gradual change. Remembering the constraints under which the medieval woman lived helps us to appreciate how far the world has come, how much has been gained, how different and how much better the condition of women now is. This appreciation is worth cultivating, a recognition of the progress that has been made and the freedoms that have been won. And yet this reflection on progress should not diminish our admiration for the medieval woman, but rather deepen it, for the strength and capability she showed under the constraints of her world are all the more admirable for the limitations she faced. The medieval woman achieved what she achieved, endured what she endured, exercised the strength and capability she possessed, all under constraints that we no longer face. This makes her achievements all the more admirable, her strength all the more remarkable, for she accomplished what she did in a world far harder and more constraining than our own. As we appreciate the progress that has been made, we may also deepen our admiration for the women who lived under the old constraints and yet showed such strength and capability. The comfort of how far we have come and the admiration for those who lived before are not in conflict but in harmony, the one deepening the other. Let that grateful reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the women themselves, at the heart of all we have explored. As we near the end of our journey, let us turn from the roles and the constraints, the labours and the achievements we have explored, to the women themselves, the real women of the medieval world, as human as ourselves, who lived out their lives in that distant age. For behind every role and every achievement were real women, and it is in remembering them as people that we find the deepest meaning in our story. Think of the real women of the medieval world, labouring and managing, loving and enduring, living out their lives with all the strength and capability, all the joys and sorrows that our story has explored. These were real women with hearts and minds and characters, with hopes and fears and dreams, living their lives as best they could in the world they were given. Behind the roles we have explored, the labourer and the manager, the wife and the widow, the lady and the nun, were real women, feeling the real experiences of human life, living their real and various lives. The strength and capability we have admired were the qualities of real women, as human and as real as any woman of our own age. Think of what they accomplished, these women, keeping their households and families going, managing their work and their affairs, enduring the hardships of their world with such strength and resilience. The achievements of medieval women were the achievements of real people, real women who laboured and managed and endured, who kept their families fed and their households running, who bore and raised children through the dangers of their world, who exercised real skill and strength and capability. There is something that calls forth our admiration in this, in the real achievements of real women under the hard conditions of their world, and remembering them as real people deepens our appreciation of what they accomplished. They were real women who achieved real things, and they deserve our admiration and our respect. Think of the joys and sorrows they knew, the loves and losses, the pleasures and hardships that filled their lives, for they knew joy as well as hardship, love as well as loss, pleasure as well as toil. The medieval woman knew the joys of love and family, the pleasures of friendship and community, the satisfactions of work well done and challenges overcome, as well as the hardships and sorrows of her world. Her life was not all labor and constraint, but also held real joy, the loves and pleasures and satisfactions that filled her days alongside its difficulties. Remembering her as a real person, we remember her joys as well as her hardships, the full humanity of her life, the pleasures and satisfactions, as well as the labors and sorrows. In remembering the women of the medieval world in this way, we move beyond the roles and the constraints to a deeper appreciation of them as real people, as fellow human beings, as women much like ourselves who lived out their lives in a distant and difficult age. They loved and labored, endured and prevailed, knew joy and sorrow, lived out their lives with strength and capability in the world they were given. It is right that we remember them so, with admiration and recognition, seeing across the centuries the real women behind all the roles and achievements, our kin in the shared experience of human life. Let that human recognition settle gently in the dark. We turn now to our final gentle thought, the thread that connects us to them across the centuries. As our long journey through the world of medieval women draws toward its close, let us hold one final, gentle thought, a thought that reaches across all the centuries between the medieval woman and our own age, and finds, in the end, a deep and human connection. For all the differences of their world, the women of the medieval age were part of the same long human story of which we are part, connected to us by the deep continuities of human life. We are connected to the women of the medieval world by the great chain of the generations, the long succession of women who lived and labored and loved and gave rise to new generations that connects us across the centuries to those who came before. The women of the medieval world were part of this long succession, this great chain of the generations that stretches back through all the ages and continues in us. They were mothers and grandmothers, the ancestors of those who came after, connected to us by the unbroken chain of the generations that binds all of humanity across time. In this great succession, the medieval women are our ancestors, and we their descendants, connected by the long thread of human life that runs across the centuries. And we are connected to them too, by the deep and enduring experiences of human life, the labor and the love, the hardship and the endurance, the joys and sorrows that connect women and all people across all the ages. The medieval woman knew the same fundamental experiences that we know, the love of family and the satisfaction of work, the pain of loss and the joy of connection, the struggles and triumphs of human life. In these shared experiences, she is connected to us across the centuries, her life speaking to our own through the common experiences of humanity. However different her world, the medieval woman shared with us the deep experiences of human life. And in these shared experiences, she is our kin, connected to us across the centuries. There is something steadying and gentle in this thought, this sense of connection across the centuries to the women who lived so long ago in that distant world. They are gone now, every one of them, the women of the medieval world, their labors long since ended, their lives long since past, all of them long at rest across the great gulf of the centuries. But they were here, they lived, they labored and loved, and endured with such strength and capability. They were part of the long human story that continues in us, and we are connected to them by the unbroken thread of that story, the great succession of the generations, and the shared experience of human life. And so we can let them rest now, the women of the medieval world, with a kind of admiration and tenderness, a sense of our connection to them across the centuries. Their world was hard, and their lives were constrained, and we would not wish to return to the limitations under which they lived. But they showed such strength and capability, they endured and prevailed with such resilience, and they were part of the long human story, of which we too are part. Let that gentle sense of connection settle over you now, soft and calming in the dark, as we prepare at last to let the whole long story go and drift away into sleep. Let it carry you gently toward rest, this thought of the long succession of women of which you are a part, stretching back across the centuries to the strong and capable women of the medieval world and far, far beyond. We turn now, at last, towards sleep. So let it all go now, gently, the whole long world we have wandered through tonight. The entire rich and various world of medieval women. Let it fade, the way the past fades, the way the centuries dissolve into a soft and shapeless distance. The labourers and the managers, the wives and the widows, the ladies and the nuns, the queens and the wise women, all the strong and capable women of the medieval world, growing dim and quiet and far away, until there is only the soft dark, and your own slow breathing, and the gathering tide of sleep. Let the women of the medieval world grow quiet and distant now. Let the spindles fall still, the alehouses fade, the great halls and the humble cottages settle into the deep stillness of the vanished past. Let the whole rich world of medieval women, all their labour and all their strength, drift gently away into the depths of time, all of them long at rest now, many centuries into the silence of the past. They are gone now, every one of them, the strong and capable women of that distant age, their labours long since ended, their lives long since past, generation upon generation of women at rest in the deep past, and there is a great soft quiet where all their strength and striving once was. Let them rest, gently, in the peace of the long-vanished centuries. And now, at last, so may you. Feel the warmth and comfort of your bed, soft and safe around you. Feel how far you are from all that ancient labour and hardship, how safe, how comfortable, how gently held by the quiet of your own night. There is nothing you need to carry from all we have explored, nothing to trouble you, no hardship to disturb the calm of your rest, only the soft dark and the deep quiet and the simple comfort of your own warm bed, many centuries away from all that we have touched upon tonight. Feel your breathing slow and your body soften, and the small cares of the day loosen their grip one by one and drift away into the warm dark until there is only you and the quiet and the deepening peace. And feel perhaps a quiet gratitude as you lie there, safe and comfortable, for the gentle world you inhabit, so far removed from the hard lives of those distant women, and a quiet admiration for the strength and capability they showed under the constraints of their world. You are safe, and you are comfortable, and you are free in ways the medieval woman could scarcely have imagined, and you may feel, as you rest, both gratitude for how far the world has come, and admiration for the strong women who lived before. There is nothing to fear and nothing to trouble you, only the soft surrender to sleep, the gentle sinking down into the warm and shapeless dark, where all is quiet and peaceful and well. The whole long story we have travelled, the whole rich world of medieval women, can simply be set down now and released, dissolving into the soft dark, leaving you weightless and at peace, drifting gently down into sleep. And if any last image still lingers at the edge of your thoughts, some woman at her spinning, some alewife at her brewing, some lady in her hall, some wise woman with her herbs, let it grow soft now, and slow, and distant, the way a dream dissolves as you slip past its edge into sleep, the images dimming, the world fading, the whole medieval world dissolving quietly into the warm and shapeless dark. You can simply let it drift away, like the day itself, like the centuries themselves, out into the quiet and gone. Good night, traveller. The strong and capable women of the medieval world are long at rest now, all their labour long since ended, all of them long since passed into the silence of the deep past, across the great gulf of the centuries, and you are safe and warm and well, here in the gentle quiet of your own night, many centuries away. Rest easy, sleep deep. I'll be here, somewhere in the quiet, when you wake.